just around a decade and a half old, BRICS is the latest economic bloc on the planet. But somehow, they just might be the biggest challengers to the current world economic order dominated by the West. It usually takes much longer than 15 years for economic alliances to become a potential challenge to the global order, but BRICS is onto something unique. So just how big is BRICS? How was it formed? What are its goals? How does it compare to its Western counterparts? And can it really end up dominating the global economy? Stay tuned to put all the answers. Act 1. History and Formation. Before we get into how big BRICS is, we need to first be able to answer the question, what is BRICS? Well, simplistically, BRICS is an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But that is putting it simplistically. A more contextual definition of BRICS is that it's an intergovernmental organization originally created to highlight investment opportunities that evolved into a cohesive geopolitical bloc. Initially coined as BRIC in 2001 by then Goldman Sachs chief economist Jim O'Neill without the inclusion of South Africa, the economic bloc was founded in 2009 as something of an informal club that would one day challenge the Western-dominated world order. From the 9/11 attacks could reshape the global order, and that the BRIC nations, which he imagined to take advantage, had economies forecasted to outpace the global GDP increase in 2002. Also outlining their potential in a paper he wrote termed Building Better Economic BRICS, which is some commendable wordplay. In case you're wondering who initiated the creation of BRICS, it was Russia. I mean, of course it was Russia. Even the first summit of the Union on the 16th of June 2009 was held in Yekaterinburg, which is a Russian city. But the founding countries also included Brazil, India, and another famous rival to Western economic dominance, China. While the term BRIC was coined in 2001 under the context of a foreign investment strategy, initial solid discussions about the Union actually happened before 2009. In fact, the foreign ministers of Brazil, Russia, India, and China actually met in New York City during the UN General Debate in September of 2006 to begin discussions of their potential union. The first formal summit of the Union focused on improving the global economic condition and reforming financial institutions, while also touching matters like the involvement of developing economies in global affairs, as well as improved cooperation between member states. And summits have been held annually ever since, with heads of states and governments of members' nations usually convening at an agreed location, and each nation also taking up annual rotating chairmanship of groups for fairness in decisions. However, the most notable statement that Yekaterinburg Summit brought up was the need for a new, stable, and more diverse global reserve currency, a proclamation that sparked a fall in the dollar against other major currencies and arguably established BRIC as a potential threat to the global order. It's important to note that the statement in point didn't directly criticize the dominance of the US dollar, but BRIC had Russian and Chinese leaders, whose governments had previously criticized the dollar dominance of the global economy, putting out statements like that. So it's no surprise that the statement had such an effect on the value of the dollar. China needed an African ally within BRICS ranks, and South Africa had already begun efforts to join the group, so the country was formally invited to join the Union, and on the 24th of December 2010, they officially became a member nation of the group, which was now renamed to BRICS. And in April 2011, the BRICS Summit, which was held in Sanya, China, was attended by then South African President Jacob Zuma. Act 2. Objectives and Goals. The 5 countries that made up the first official unit of BRICS had and still have consistently been ranked among the world's fastest growing emerging market economies, and they all have a few things in common, such as low labor costs, favorable demographics, either by average age or population size, and an abundance of natural resources in a period of global commodities boom. BRICS was initially touted to become a powerful economic bloc rather than a political alliance, like the European Union, for example. But with economic power usually comes political power, and the leaders of the BRICS nations have tended to act in each other's interests, meaning that they have shared goals and objectives. The main goal of BRICS is obviously to foster cooperation among its member countries because sustainable, fair growth can only be promoted and achieved through a near-perfect harmony among involved nations where everyone's growth and progress is taken into account. Each country involved has an area of economic strength, which could be used to further build relations, increasing multilateral trade and development, and even eliminate competition where possible. The building of economic bridges and political coordination, financing of key sustainable developments, social and cultural exchanges, innovation and improvement of technologies, and the fostering of peace and security remain important goals for BRICS, especially when it comes to its influence on international affairs. The BRICS group also has a list of joint priorities to achieve, which include working to resolve regional problems like conflicts in Libya, Syria, and Afghanistan, tackling biased financial and economic reforms from the likes of the World Bank and International Monetary Funds, as well as establishing the BRICS Interbank Cooperation Mechanism. However, a rather less spoken but hidden in plain sight goal of BRICS is to become the world's economic leader and dethrone the West. And they intend to do this by attempting to solve the problems that plague the global financial system led by the United States and its Western allies. Analysts believe that with their goals and objectives achieved, BRICS could become the center of global economy by the year 2050, overtaking the alliance of the G7, with Russia excluded, in terms of income per capita. But following the slowdown of the global economy post the 2008 global recession, as well as the 2014 collapse in oil prices, growth in the BRICS economies experienced a slowdown, and the union didn't look as attractive from the outside for a while. However, all that seems to have changed, and sentiments have been positive following the United States' rash financial decisions during the COVID-19 pandemic, where the Federal Reserve printed trillions of dollars and basically plunged the dollarized global economy into debt. Act 3. New members. Might be a bit difficult to fathom given their low-key plans for global domination, but the first 5 BRIC nations are all part of the G20, a group of the 20 major economies on the planet. So it's no surprise that more nations from outside that group have wanted to join and possibly benefit from all that financial power. And it's not just the financial power of BRICS that made it look so attractive to nations that have declared an interest. These nations also view BRICS as an alternative to Western economic dominance, which had been facing increased scrutiny over the past 15 years or so, but especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, where life-saving vaccines were turned into a profit-making scheme rather than a way to save lives. Countries such as Argentina, Egypt, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Gabon, and dozens more all expressed an interest to join during the early days of BRICS. BRICS has been looking to expand its sphere of influence, but obviously not everyone can make the cut, and also not everyone has maintained an interest. After almost 15 years of consisting of only 5 nations, BRICS finally decided to add a further 4 countries on the first day of 2024. These countries include 2 from Africa, Egypt and Ethiopia, and 2 countries from the Middle East, Iran and the United Arab Emirates. These mark the first involvement of countries where Islam is the dominant religion and showcases BRICS' commitment to expanding their influence across all divisions of life. Other nations such as Argentina, Bolivia, and Algeria have all reportedly made applications or at least declared interest in joining up with the BRICS super team, and the Bolivian government is particularly determined to curb their dependence on the US dollar. However, there have been recent reports that Saudi Arabia had also been invited to join BRICS, but declined as they are apparently reviewing the benefits of being part of an alliance before making the decision. The input of Saudi Arabia's trillion-dollar economy would have been huge for BRICS. But regardless, in terms of pure economic might, BRICS is already actually quite huge. Act 4. Economic output. BRICS consists of Russia, India, and China, who are all among the top 5 largest economies in the world. So it's no surprise that they would have some financial might. In fact, according to Statista, the GDP of BRICS members' nations reportedly accounted for over 31% of global GDP in 2023, when adjusted for purchasing power parity. This is a higher figure than the reported 30.7% economic contribution from the G7 nations, which include Canada, France, Italy, Japan, the UK, Germany, and the United States. So yes, BRICS is quite financially competitive. BRICS also has some financial architecture in place as they continue to expand their sphere of influence. This includes the New Development Bank, or NDB, and the Contingent Reserve Arrangement, or CRA, both of which became active in 2015. The NDB, formerly referred to as the BRICS Development Bank, is a multilateral development bank just like the World Bank that is operated by the 5 leading BRICS states. The bank had a starting capital of around $50 billion, with each member contributing $10 billion, but this has since grown past the $100 billion mark. Its primary investment objective is into infrastructure projects, which account for the majority of its loans, with up to $34 billion worth of loans authorized each year. Non-BRIC countries such as Uruguay and Bangladesh have joined the NDB since 2021, and recent inductees, Egypt and UAE, also joined in the same year. And the NDB aims to strengthen itself and possibly put itself in a position to replace organizations such as the International Monetary Fund as a lender. It has also recently strengthened institutional ties with the Islamic Development Bank, following BRICS' acceptance into Islamic countries, UAE and Iran. The BRICS Contingency Reserve Arrangement, on the other hand, is a framework for providing protection against global liquidity pressures, especially with the current economic climate, as the dollarization of the global economy seems to have aggravated this issue across the world. BRICS intends to curb this issue of economic volatility and the uncertain macroeconomic environment brought by the currency issues. And this component was signed into treaty in Fortaleza in July of 2014, before being confirmed in July of 2015 with its inaugural meetings of its governing council and standing committee held on the 4th of September in 2015 in Ankara, Turkey. BRIC leaders have also proposed an alternative to the SWIFT payment system, with an additional plan involving moving to settlements in national currency. Developments after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, where they were cut off from the SWIFT network, would probably depend on the determination of BRICS towards developing this payment system. However, the first 4 member states do have their own alternatives, including China's cross-border interbank payment system, India's structured financial messaging system, or SFMS, Brazil's PIX, and Russia's own SPFS. But one would expect a general payment system to be developed nonetheless. Speaking of general payment systems, BRICS countries have been in discussions for the development of a new common currency, which will allow them to conduct trade more fairly, quickly, and easily. Whether this would come to be is a topic for another time, but if it does happen, it could easily become the greatest threat to the dollar in almost a century, and possibly of all time. Act 5. Comparison to Western Bloc. We discussed about the financial size of BRICS, but how does it compare to the financial powers on the Western Bloc? When you mention the Western Economic Bloc, a few groups come to mind, like the G7 and the European Union. Generally, they include countries that allied with the United States during the Old War, but this is informal, and some countries who didn't ally themselves still form part of this bloc, and some who did are also not part of the bloc today. Economically, the biggest groups in the Western Bloc include the G7 and the EU. The EU, with its 27 member countries, is the largest and most intertwined trading bloc in the world. It had an official currency, the euro, for over 3 decades, and its economic activity, which comprises of imports and exports in 2022, exceeded $15 trillion. Comparatively, BRICS had a total of $9 trillion worth of economic activity within the same period, with China accounting for almost 15% of its exports and almost 11% of its imports. The G7, on the other hand, comprises of 3 nations already belonging to the EU, along with former EU nations, the United Kingdom, and Canada, Japan, and the United States. Obviously, the United States elevates the financial strength of the G7, but the other countries are still relatively strong economies, and the G7 has accounted for 13.7% of global GDP growth in the past 10 years. However, with its new entrance, BRICS will account for around $30 trillion in GDP in 2024. And while this is lower than the estimated $46 trillion from G7 nations, the gap is expected to close as economies such as India continue to grow at an impressive rate, while demographic declines are observed in G7 nations like France and Italy. An honorable mention also goes out to United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, which aims to exclude trade walls between its 3 member nations and had almost $8 trillion worth of economic activity in 2022, with the US obviously being the highest contributor. Act 6. Prospects of BRICS. Even though some analysts predict the global financial dominance of BRICS by 2050, These are nothing but predictions, and certain factors could easily change the trajectory of things. Western analysts highlight the variance in political systems, economic instability within member nations, the economic size gap between members, disagreements among member nations over reforms, and existing territorial disputes between India and China as possible barriers to the success of BRICS. These analysts do have a point, because when a communist country such as China controls 41% of the GDP of BRICS, they are bound to have bigger political say within the association. Also, Russia is the closest in terms of the political systems to China, and it's possible that decisions made by BRICS could be in favor of the political system. However, there is so far no real evidence that BRICS would ever turn into a communist proxy group, and a parliamentary forum was even created to somewhat combat the concerns. The BRICS Parliamentary Forum was established during Russia's chairship of the organization in 2015 to strengthen and promote contacts at leadership levels of chambers, committees, and group parliamentarians. The forum is responsible for interparliamentary exchanges as well as consultations along with the development of new systems for interparliamentary cooperation. Many of BRICS's current members also still post growth rates higher than their counterparts in the G7, and the GDP of BRICS is expected to double by 2050, while the G7 is projected for a paltry 50% growth. The new alliances will see BRICS control around 46% of the world's population and resources such as lithium and petroleum products from nations interested in joining the BRICS, and this could even further increase these growth figures and drive its expansion across the globe. So BRICS continues to consolidate its power and has now become a potent negotiation force which now challenges the geopolitical and economic goals of the West, especially the US. The group is quickly garnering support in areas such as North Africa and parts of Asia, and this expansion is raising concern for US policymakers as they see the growth of BRICS as a one-way ticket to the de-dollarization of the global economy. So what's going to happen eventually? Well, no one knows for sure, but these are some of the most interesting times for the global economy in the last century or so. The dominance of the dollar in trade has never been under more threat than it currently is. And a huge reason behind this is the emergence of BRICS and what seems to be a new global south. But what do you think about the BRICS alliance? Could it potentially become the next global force controlling the economy? Or is it destined to remain backseated to the West? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below.